Ludum Dare 54's theme was limited space. At first I was thinking about some kind of gravity platformery game, kind of like this. But as I thought about this, I couldn't come up with a unique twist that I still felt like an interesting game to play. I'm sure there's one out there, I just couldn't think of it during the course of this jam. Instead, I decided to work on a MVP of my brick breaker game that I've been kind of thinking about. I think this is going to be my first real project, and so that was a good opportunity for me to kind of try out the core idea, try to get a starting point on it, and also see if I could get some feedback on the core concept throughout this jam. The core idea is that you have two different colors that the player can assign, and after that, the ball can change colors depending on what paddle it hits, and the ball can then break bricks that are the same color. To begin my work, I began with pixel art, because it was going to be very simple and very, very basic, because I am a super noob when it comes to pixel art. I believe they call this programmer art. It's really good that I did keep these very simple, because I had to rescale these like twice during the course of the jam. Next, it was of course going and making the basics of the brick breaker / Pong game. Pong because there's a paddle on each side. Of course you have the ball and then 4 walls. You may be thinking, why 4 walls? Well, this was something I thought of early, and I'm actually happy that I did. An extra wall, instead of having the ball go off into space, would make it much easier to test this out early on. And as a bonus, I realized this could be a pretty nice power-up to have during the full game, though I didn't get the chance to implement power-ups during the course of the jam. Right now, the ball and the paddles are both character body 2Ds, and I'm curious to see if a rigid body 2D could be the right option for the ball. They have made some changes in Godot 4 that I haven't messed with rigid body 2Ds enough to know, but that is something I am looking at. So there were kind of 2 big tasks that I had to take on next, and the first one was being able to allow the player to choose a primary and a secondary color, and being able to apply those to the ball, the paddle, and the bricks, and furthermore, only allowing the ball to interact with the bricks that were the same color. At first, I thought I was gonna have to go and like try to match the color up, and I was doing that, and then I realized, why don't I just update the collision layer and the mask when the ball changes colors? And that worked perfectly. The idea here is that the player only can change the color of the paddles, and when the ball hits a paddle that's a different color, it updates the color of the ball. And something that's really nice in Godot is the UI tools are really good. So creating the actual UI for the player to pick these colors was really simple, and it was also pretty easy to get those colors assigned to the ball, paddle, and bricks. The other big task that I needed to take on that I only partially succeeded at was to update the move and collide function so that ultimately when the ball collided with the paddle, it didn't come off at an exact opposite angle. By default, you can kind of do a dot bounce and give a normalized vector, and that'll let you have, like, if it comes in at 45 degrees, it goes out at 45 degrees. Simple enough. But ultimately, most brick breakers tend to have a bit more nuance than that. So I found a tutorial where they were talking about how to do this in Godot 4, but the problem was they were doing a vertical style game and I was doing a horizontal style game. And so my implementation left a lot to be desired. I will have a link to this video because I think it was pretty useful in kind of seeing how they approached the problem. It was also interesting to see how they actually created their levels. I didn't end up using that method because it would not work for the type of game that I'm building, but it was interesting to see and gave me some ideas on how I might take this on in the full game where I do want to have more levels and, you know, maybe some other hidden features. After this, I needed to add stuff like lives and a game over screen, a start menu, and an about. I got most of that figured out. The only thing that I really didn't get the chance to figure out was scoring. For some reason, it just decided it was not going to work. Something about my implementation just wasn't working. That is something I did not get the chance to add, which was admittedly kind of frustrating. But ultimately, I have a good idea on how I can go about working on that. I just have to go and do it. Let's talk a little bit about the feedback that I've gotten so far. I haven't gotten my official rankings yet. I do have enough ratings to get rankings once they post, but I have gotten some interesting comments. One that I got a couple of people asking about was directly controlling the color of the ball instead of having to hit it with paddles. This is something I had been thinking about, so it's interesting that they came to the same conclusion, and my thought at the time was it felt a little bit more like Ikaruga, if you remember that game. And funnily enough, that's exactly what the commenter said too. That, to me, was an encouraging sign that I need to at least explore that idea and try out some levels with both setups to see if maybe having that be the option instead is a better bet, or at the least, it could be a power-up that a player can get, where they can just immediately change the color of the ball back and forth. People did point out the issue with the ball not bouncing quite right. You can see a screenshot here of where somebody got the ball almost entirely vertical, and it was going to take forever for the ball to actually come back down. Somebody mentioned I probably need a max angle, and they're right. That is probably what I need to figure out how to do. But overall, the general feedback was pretty positive, and people seem to enjoy the idea of the core concept, which is very encouraging to me because I really want to take this and make this into a full game. While this project is going to be fairly small, I do want to add things like new modes and some like co-op or competitive type mode. I do want to do things like that. But right now, I don't even have a name yet. So if you can think of a name for this game or features that you think I should add, feel free to sound off in the comments below. I also wanted to just briefly touch on some kind of lessons learned from the Game Jam to kind of emphasize what I'll be focused on a little bit more next time. And the first one is more MVP type goals. There were times where I think I spent too long early on trying to polish something, and I think a good example of that is the bounce. I should have just left it as a standard kind of normalized vector bounce first, and then came back to that. The reason I say this is because ultimately, I didn't even have time to implement like a pause screen or sound, and I wanted to do both, but I just simply ran out of time. Another thing that I think could be really helpful is working on preparing an about page graphic in advance. It wouldn't be anything directly with the game, but it would have stuff like my YouTube and my Twitter and all that stuff so that people could, check that out and see more about me, and maybe if somebody else was on my team, see more about them. One of my kind of issues with the theme is that it seemed so broad. Almost anything could be argued that it was within the theme. So I think if I encounter something like this again, I want to try to add something else to the theme to make it a bit more narrow, to help kind of focus those ideas. Because limited space, you have like inventory system ideas. The levels in the game itself are limited in space. That's how I came back to the brick breaker idea. Even if you have a map as broad as Zelda, you're still kind of having limited space. You can't keep going off, probably you can keep going off the map, but it's not intended for you to keep going off the map. How about that? Another thing I'd really like to learn more about, and I just haven't had time yet, and I didn't have time during the jam, is shaders. I don't remember where it was, but it was kind of the idea that anytime you see something looking cool in the game, it's probably a shader. And I want to get to the point where I can at least implement some simple shaders for the next jam game. And if possible, prepare screenshots and videos as I go, because I got to the end of the day on Monday, because I was really just trying to push this out to itch.io and the Ludum Dare site, and I didn't have any screenshots or videos at the time, and I was pretty much ready to just get out of my office for an hour or two at the least. That's something where I think being able to do that as I go along is a much better idea if I can. And I'm really glad I went this route with the Game Jam, because it's given me a lot of encouragement to keep going with that idea. It makes me think that this idea is actually an interesting kind of mechanic for a game, and regardless of how it does in the ranking, this is something that I think is going to be my first project, and once I get a name and get a couple more things done, then it'll probably be a Steam page out there for it. And by the way, if you would like to follow along with this exciting adventure into this brick breaker color game that I'm working on, feel free to subscribe. I'm Michael. I talk about game development, I talk about beginner tips, because I am still pretty early in the journey myself. So If you're new to this, I completely get where you're coming from because I am new too. If you're interested in Godot and you'd like some high-level tips, because that's what I used in this project, you can check my video out here. As always, thanks for watching, have a great day, and I will see you next time.